Welcome back, friends. This week we're talking to Gill and Hayley. Gillian Kayrooz is an artist from Western Sydney. She has completed residencies in China, Japan, and most recently is at the Parramatta Artist Studio program. Hayley, who has been on the show before, you can check her episode out, it's number 7. She joins Gill and I as we talk about Sydney College of the Arts, or we like to call it SCA. We talk about Gill's artistic journey and being open. If you enjoyed this episode, please show your love on Spotify by giving it a 5-star rating. It'll take about 7 seconds and it'll help get these episodes out to more people. You don't even have to write anything, just 2 taps and it's done. All right, love you guys. Enjoy the episode. Gill, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And welcome, Hayley. Welcome back to the
Thank
podcast.
you.
Hayley recommended Gill as a guest to come on the show, so I thought this would be really fun in light of Art Month coming up, to have these kind of just fun conversations and see where it takes us. To start with, you had a really supportive teacher, Gill, growing up in high school.
Yes. Yeah.
The conversations between your teacher and your parents to support you through your art journey was a difficult thing that you said in your timeline. And I think that's so rare to have that, you know, when your teacher's like really vouching for you and like has that conversation with your parents, like that's a big deal. And so how, like, will you just share that experience with us?
Yeah, of course. Just to give some background on myself, I work as a visual artist now, which is like bomb to say because I think I wanted to be an artist since I was a kid. And the teacher who was my visual arts teacher from like year 7 to 12 obviously like saw that I was very passionate about art and really was able to kind of not only like hone my skills with me, but also kind of really introduce contemporary and visual arts to me in a way that I saw there to be a future in it, or I saw that there was a career there, and like the steps were visible once I finished high school, even though like in my head I was like, oh, I'll go to art school. Like, what does that mean when you're, like 13, 14, and understanding that it's more than just practical skills, and that, like critical thinking is a major part of that. And I think she really, instilled in me a lot of hope, which growing up out in Western Sydney, like I wasn't going to galleries and museums all the time. And even though my parents, took me to the gallery as much as they could, it wasn't regularly enough, like compared to other kids when I went to art school, or, my family itself doesn't come from a creative background at all. My mum's a teacher. My dad worked in insurance. My siblings went into science and insurance. So I think when I was kind of going through my visual arts journey then in high school, everyone was like, what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah, I feel like that's so relatable. I mean, I don't know about you, Hayley, but I felt like growing up, I was always different. Like my mom, I come from a family of teachers. My mom was a teacher and my dad, he works in corrective services, and my brother, works at a bank. So it was like, what do we do with this child? This like really vibrant, weird kid. Like, how do we foster that? And I feel like I was pretty lucky in that I got really liberal Indian parents, which is really rare to find. And I don't know, Hayley, how was your experience with your family growing up? Was it the same? Was it supportive, or was it the other way around?
It was incredibly supportive. I think I had quite a luxurious upbringing, primarily in the way that like my mum is she's always wanted me to be like as creative as possible. I went to all the gifted and talented like things. We didn't have a huge amount of money, but she would always like enroll me in after school classes and just anything to push me into it, because her thing was like sport. So it was like if I wasn't going to be a professional like netballer, basketballer, hurdler, I'm 5'3", so that wasn't going to happen. And just like he just saw that opportunity was there. And my dad's he's a tool maker by trade, so he grew up in like old Tuangabi kind of area, and he did all of his hand skills. So seeing me paint and create, that was really like, I think he saw something in my like of him in me, and yeah, that was really encouraging. It did there were points of contention maybe over the last like 5 years being like, all right, so how are you going to monetize this? Like, let's start thinking long term here. So the curatorial decisions and some of the other like job opportunities that have come up have quelled their fears, I think. But it was like a very privileged position to be like, yeah, go do painting, do whatever you want. And I'm an only child as well, so I don't have the kind of sibling comparisons either. So yeah, it's quite interesting to see the differences of like parenting and I guess like location of how that, you know, as like Gill works with a lot of like Western Sydney artists as like a collaborator and a facilitator. I would classify you as, Gill, because you're very good at, you know, channeling these, I guess, theoretical concepts, not only through your own work, but also like lifting other people's work up and helping foster like the Western Sydney perspective.
Thank you.
Sorry to throw so many.
No. I think that it's so like when we think about parents and their like mentorship and how they've taught us, I mean, they really are our first teachers and they set the tone for all of our, you know, well-being. But I'm so curious, like one thing the three of us all have in common is that we all went to SCA and we all have very different lives. You know, like I went down into teaching and but like SCA changed me, you know, and it's cheesy, but it's true. Like it really like it, you know, you wear jeans at SCA and you're like, that's not normal. Like because you feel when you dress normal, you know, at SCA, you're the odd one out because everyone's so like articulate and expressive in every way. And I remember like speaking of mentors, I had Matthias. And so Hayley, you had Matthias as well at one point. And I remember like my whole, like, this is one thing that I think I have two memories that changed my life. And one was that I remember like painting and like I have this like white piece of paper, like this big white sheet of paper that I'm going to paint on this canvas that I've made and all that. And I've got all this like planning around it. Like I've got these references and everything like that. And it's like a week has gone by. I'm adding more references. And then Matthias just comes in. He like removes the references and he's like, just paint. Like, what are you doing? And he's like, if you make shit will happen. Just paint. And that really has stuck with me for a really, really long time. So Gill, I'm wondering like, what were your big moments at SCA?
I think it's a tough one because I totally understand that feeling of, you know, walking into SCA and it feeling quite overwhelming. Like I think especially, I'm going to try and hold off, like keep bringing it up, but like coming from Western Sydney, like there were not many people that were going into creative fields or going into visual arts. And then coming to art school, I was like, is this what like everyone else was doing in high school? Or like, is this how everyone else was engaging with art in a way that just wasn't like, it wasn't on my level, and like the way people were dressing, and I don't know, I had not really left my area in the way that maybe other people had. And that was because, you know, everything was so far, and, you know, traveling outside of my suburbs and stuff, like it took a long time it took me an hour and a half each way every day to get to SCA. Like I think those kind of moments, I'm looking back, and especially working from home now, I'm like, the whole process of going to art school was a big kind of turning point of like me being my high school self to me going to art school. In terms of like other big points, like of course, like the grad shows and, you know, creating bodies of work that you really fell in love with were great momentous moments. But I think like there was a point maybe in third year when I kind of realized that, and maybe this is connected to my parents, I think, and this is something that I really value in terms of, even though they're not artistic people or creative people, the things that they have kind of instilled in me, which was hard work and which was, you know, like gratitude and being humble and understanding that opportunities won't just come to you if you know, don't put some hard work in. And I think that was in third year when I started to kind of understand my practice more, and I started to do a lot of things outside of art school. And I realized that art school wasn't just going to take me from point A to point B. There was some point there that I think has let me kind of continue practicing now, or has instilled like a good method of practice. Aside from, I think, meeting people and artists who I'm still friends with now, and now my peers who I shared studios with at Parramatta Artist Studios, or who I get to have a group show with like a few years at art school. Those type of things are also beautiful.
Yeah, I think that like when it comes to camaraderie at SCA, there was always a strong camaraderie, and I always loved that about SCA. Hayley, what were your fondest memories of SCA?
I just loved the space itself. We were very lucky to be able to engage in a space like Callum Park.
It was creepy at night though. Like, let's just put that out there.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Scary.
I heard a lot of ghost stories, which were very interesting. I wouldn't say, yeah, I know some people that would like sleep there overnight, and I'm just like,
really?
Yeah, I was like, oh, I don't think so.
I think the really special thing about this degree is that it's not about one specific craft. Like, yes, it is that you choose it, but you can apply it to anything. Just like you were talking about, Jill, like your parents and how they instilled hard work. Like, you can apply that to anything in the same way that SCA impacted me that way. Like, I kind of got into writing and I returned back more into music, and I left painting after my degree, actually. But I think that's what it does. But I really want to talk about your residencies, Jill, because they're so cool. So in 2017, you undertook your first residency in China, but you also mentioned how like your ideas of contemporary art and art schooling was evolving. And so will you tell us how it evolved?
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a bit of a whirlwind. That was through SCA and the Cultural Centre of China in Sydney, literally just like a random application. And then the uni was like, yeah, you're going to go in like 2 weeks. And I kind of like didn't believe it. It was like a real weird, like, SCA admin could be like rough at the best of times. So to believe that they were going to get their stuff together and fly me to China, I was like, yeah, we'll see. But it happened. And I like went with another student, Jackson Farley, who was in third year, was in honours. So he was the year ahead of me. And then, yeah, we arrived. There were people with signs like in Chengdu in the Sichuan province in the center of China. And yeah, we spent like the next 2 weeks there, literally just at the art school, living on campus with the other students, which was just like a beautiful experience that now I look back, I'm like, I will never have something like so fortunate of that experience. But their art school was like, it was really interesting. Like, it was kind of like NAS on steroids in terms of like, yeah, National Art School on, like, you go there, technical study, like we walked into the I think it was a life drawing class, and every student was like phenomenal. And that was like an interesting point, because I was like, what art am I making? Like, is it any good? Why do I like making contemporary visual art? And then there was a point, like, we were making works over that 2 week period, and we both were video artists. We both made contemporary visual arts and installations and video work. And then we had that kind of cross dialogue between all the students who were there, who were studying video and film, and were obviously like going to be, I don't know, producing like advertisements or like the next like Oscar, because their video work was incredible, but it was definitely more narrative based than it was, contemporary visual arts. So that was a really interesting crossover. And also the really interesting thing was that so many of them talked about going to art school and then going into possibly an unrelated field. Like, that was like the expected thing, like the expected path, that they would study visual art, study fine arts at art school, and then go get an actual job, or like, I don't know, go work for it. Like, not many of them.
So it was all like technical based, and then it's like that was it.
Well, yeah, it was almost like I'm gonna follow my passion for the next 3 years, but I don't think a lot of them were thinking about pursuing it as an actual career afterwards. But it was in a sense that they weren't like, they were kind of, they had agreed, like they were fine with it. They were ready to kind of like, oh, it'd be cool to keep doing this as a job, but I'll probably go and do this after art school. Whether I think in SCA it was like everyone didn't want to admit, no, like not everyone would admit that. Like, everyone wants to admit, I'm going to be an artist. But I was speaking to the curator of SCA galleries, and he said the continuation rate is 2% of people from SCA in a year who go on to continue in the visual arts field.
Wow, I didn't realize that like the rates were so low because I was one of those students. I was just like, I love art. It will always kind of be a side hustle, but I never had intended it to be my career, to be honest. I was like, I want to do something that I'm passionate about, but I was going to, I don't know, go into interior design or something sort of related, but not as conceptual, something more practical. And it's interesting that, like, I guess the Chinese art school had that perspective as well.
So that was considered a contemporary art school, Gill?
It was the fine art school, which, yeah, again, I mean, in Sydney, I guess we just call them all art schools, but maybe there is more of a technical difference, or
I mean, definitely between like SCA and NAS for sure. I think in hindsight, I reckon it would have been better for my practice had I gone to NAS than to than to SCA, because SCA you break rules and like you explore more. Like it's like just like new ground that you're trying to like make, and it's really fertile. But then NAS is just like get the techniques in. But a lot of people don't believe that. I believe that you've got to learn the techniques to break them. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Both of you, actually.
I would tend to disagree slightly, just because coming from a perspective where I guess through like primary school and high school, I little bits of technique, but I don't think that I am a technically capable artist. I think my strength lies in concepts, and the fact that I didn't have, like, there's a lot of things that I'm currently trying to unlearn from art school.
Unlearn? What do you mean?
I guess like maybe like if you make money, you're a sellout kind of thing. I don't know if that's like a high school thing or an art school thing for me. But I did find that not having the technical skills kind of allowed me to go in a different direction to other students and not have certain constraints that I was even aware of. So it's not like I was breaking rules. I was just doing a different path.
Right. What are your thoughts on that, Gill?
I agree and disagree.
Yeah.
I agree in terms of like, the conceptual side and like working in a way that kind of is very freeing, and that you don't have to kind of follow very strict technical historical like ways of making that then mean you can break them. I don't agree with that. But I kind of do agree in a sense of like becoming fully immersed in something to the point where you kind of like understand every part of it, and then that kind of allows you to like mess it up and like you kind of know what you're dealing with in a sense. I think less so in terms of like you must be like an expert. Maybe that's going against what I'm just saying, but I don't know if those two kind of situations make sense.
Gill, you said that you were offered a grant in 2018-19, and you said, quote, and wrote a successful grant application, which was truly too hard to believe. Can we just break that down? So like, what is too hard to believe?
I think I mean the word grant application is just screams like free labor, difficult, and most often like unsuccessful, right? Like I think it's kind of the side of arts that, one, I did not learn in art school. I don't think there was enough like professional practice or professional skills that I learnt in a degree that I think 100% should be taught. Like I think I had 6 weeks on it, and that was because I chose the subject. But the only way I learned how to write grants was and do applications was by like doing a ton of them, to the point where like I would write down every single application I did in a year. I still do it just to kind of reflect on how much I say free labor. I know it's part of my practice, but how much time goes into developing concepts and then proposing them to a panel of people who will decide whether it's worth it or not in the space of like a couple of minutes. And now I've been on both sides, working on the first draft board where I'm assessing applications, And now being an artist where I know what it's like to write and to put so much time and energy into building an application, whether it's for a grant or for an exhibition. And it's a difficult process of both, having to assess and only having a finite amount of time, probably unpaid as well, to go through them, and also applying. But yeah, that was one of my really early applications. It was a youth grant, so young creative leaders from Create New South Wales. And I kind of just, I guess I really knew what I wanted to do after art school, and that was going to support it. And it could have been one of those things that's like it just was the timing fell in place. But yeah, when I got the call, I was like in shock. I was like, oh, I've got money.
What now? Like, what happens next? Yeah, that's so true. I don't know, Hayley, do you have like anything to share with that? Like, gosh, proposals. That just sounds it sounds so difficult just to to sell your work. You're selling your value, really, ultimately, which is so tricky.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just listening to you, Jill, I actually feel like inspired. Like I'm like, no, I can like keep applying for grants, because sometimes it is like a process of you just like rejection after rejection, you get really bogged down and like quite disheartened. And a part of the reason is obviously, to get political, is just that there's this air of competition within Australia, because there is not enough funding to go around. There are not enough grants, and it's really not fair, because we're supposed to be, other than like the grant format, we're this really collaborative, supportive community, and the grants just kind of leave you feeling quite isolated and in this sense of comparison with other artists. But I feel inspired, like seeing Gill have all of these successes makes me think, we can all do it, because Gill, you're such a prolific and really just beautiful artist that continues to make really poignant work. And I feel like, I don't know, just something you said inspired me just in that moment of, oh, let's keep like pushing. Even just as like an artist myself, I can keep pushing for grants and not feel too disheartened, because everyone will hopefully get a turn.
I was just thinking about the successes. Like, Hayley, you were talking about successes, and Gill, another success that you had was, once you finished uni, you went to Japan and took up a 3-month self-directed residency. So what is the difference between a self-directed residency and a non-self-directed residency?
I guess in the way that I phrase it for that period of time, I guess if you're applying to a residency program that is funded, that offers support, I guess that would be like one style of residency. But in terms of mine, like the grant money went towards the travel and to some of the spaces where I was paying to stay to undertake residencies. And then I was kind of developing this program where, as I traveled throughout Japan, I made sure I had different residencies and different exhibitions organized, so that they were kind of happening one after the other.
Right. Okay. And you did say that in Japan, your experience in Japan changed your life, and you returned, you came anew. How did that happen?
That was like my first 6 months out of art school, which was going to be a bit of a scary year in terms of, that's what I think a lot of people fear coming out of art school. Everyone's like, how do you make it work? And how do you kind of continue once you finish art school? And, again, I think I was very lucky that I had that grant application at the end of 2018. So I knew that I had to travel the next year and I had to undertake that program and that residency. In terms of how it changed me, that was the first time I had lived by myself, let alone in a different country where I didn't know the language. And, the first month I was living in the suburbs of Sapporo. So I wasn't even living in Tokyo. I was really living in the suburbs where there was one person maybe in the 4 weeks that I saw that wasn't Japanese. So it was really in it kind of thing. And I think there was just a lot of even non-art, just contemplative life kind of thinking about, I don't know, your existence in a way, or when you're actually removed from routine and from, your normal environment, the kind of feelings that you experience are very different. And there was this one day in particular that in Sapporo, there's this mountain called Mount Moiwa, and it's like there's like Mount Fuji, which is the tallest, and then there's like 3 or 4 other mountains. So this was like one of the 3 or 4 that was the tallest. And the day that I like went to climb it, and I only had 2 days left in Sapporo, the day that I went to climb it, the cable cart broke down. And it was like the one thing I had planned the whole trip, like the whole month. I was like, because it was like the view was incredible. Like the view would be like looking over the city, and it was like stunning. But there was a path, like a trek that you could do to trek the mountain. And so I had to wait for the typhoon to finish, which is another story. And like maybe this is also my ignorance is like
Wait, tell us about the typhoon as well.
Well, it just
give us all the goss.
Typhoon happened. I was like, we had to prep, we had to get extra food, they told us to fill the bathtubs like with extra water. And then it was a very small like storm, and they're like, oh, that was a false alarm.
Oh my God.
And I was kind of like, okay, cool. Like, I guess they're just things that we don't consider, that don't happen really that much in Australia, or in Sydney at least. So then the final day before I left, I went to trek this mountain, like post typhoon. It was like very muddy. And yeah, it was this like 2.5 hour trek up and down. I had no idea what bear bells were, which in Hokkaido there's quite often like brown bears. And as I was like walking past these like elderly Japanese hikers, I could hear them coming because they had these bells. And then I got to the top and you could buy bear bells, and I was like, oh my gosh, have I just like walked 2.5 hours like with the possibility of like running into a bear? That trek was really tough. Like there was a point maybe 1.5 hours in where I was like, I'm not prepped. I'm a real ignorant 22-year-old right now, wearing like my Air Forces, my Nike Air Forces, in like pure mud, like in a jumpsuit, in like steamy hot like Japan right now. And I was like, well, I can go back down, or I could like really just have faith that I'll be right, keep going. And I pushed it out, and I got to the top, and then I had to walk back down. But it was just one of those moments where like getting to the top, I was like, gosh, like that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. And there was no one there, like no reception. If I died, I died. Like no one would know. But it was just one of those moments where I was like, oh, I've got this. Like, I can back myself more than I thought I could.
It just like reminds me of a lot of like spiritual texts, or texts about, like, you look at the Prophet Muhammad, or Moses, in these, I guess, not struggles against nature, but like to prove that they are capable and have grit within themselves. That seems like such a spiritual or like foundational journey for you, just going up the mountain. And then it also reminds me of, was that around the time that you created, I remember you did a workshop that I think was a part, like when you got back to Sydney, that was a part of your Japan trip, and it was things within mud, or it was like some kind of still life scanning photography.
Yeah, the scanned works. That was made, that wasn't to do with the mountain walk, but that was like the location that I was staying at. That was like materials collected from that place.
Yeah, that has always, those photographs, like I can see them in my head, have always kind of stuck with me as this, like they're quite ethereal, they're quite dark, they have this real, I don't know, mystical quality to them, even though a lot of the items within the photographs are everyday things. And it's just, as we were saying, kind of about SCA, it's the everyday that are these foundational elements of our practice.
That actually reminds me of your Parramatta studio. You posted a video up of your studio, and I was like, when is the voice going to come? I just kept reading. I was like, oh no, it's not there. It's meant to not be there. But we'll come to that in a second. I really want to mention how you become an aunt, which is I'm just like, I'm obsessed because I became an aunt last year, maybe the year before. Yeah, the year before. And like she's like the first in our family of the next generation. And so how did that new role in your life, influence you and your work?
Mm. I mean so my nephew, who was the same thing with you, the first, in the next generation. So he was born like 2-3 months before I had that Japan trip. So he's almost 4 now, which is insane. And my niece was born last September, so there's 2 now. But yeah, I think that really came to play with the Japan trip as well, in terms of just, it's like another realization of your kind of place in your family, but also like in life as well. And I think it kind of, in one way, that whole kind of period of time, like obviously built confidence in myself and made me really like become, I felt like a lot stronger in terms of like, how I went about myself and how I went about, I don't know, working and stuff. But it also kind of, I think, made me more attuned to not doing that in maybe a selfish way, or kind of understanding that there's a lot more to life than being successful. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's like how to like have faith and feel like I really love my practice without feeling like I needed to be the most successful artist in the world. Or
yeah, it's that break of ego. Even just having friends that are having kids and having nieces and nephews, for me it's been this just shattering of ego. I'm not even a parent yet, but they make you, like, they force you into humility. And I think it's quite interesting that, Barney, you bring up Jill being an auntie, because it's something that's quite separated within the art world in general, kind of like the fine art world. You don't look at, I'm these like familial connections that, have a lot of importance to me, but particularly maybe within a motherhood or a female sense, it's not spoken about as much because it devalues your, I guess, status as an artist. But it's so lovely to hear more people talk about the children they have around them, because childhood is something we all go through and something that continues to be really prevalent in our lives. And it's so earth-shattering for a lot of us.
Can you tell, Jill, who's like the artist here and who's like the one with like the really casual, reflections? Yeah, no, this is why I had Hayley on, so we have like both perspectives. It's so interesting, like you say that, because because women are so many things. Like we just are. And like we can't be categorized. We can't be put in a box. We can't even do that. Like, and it's not even that we don't want to. It's like we can't. We're just so many things. And I think that's I felt like as soon as you mentioned that you're an aunt and that's like a new role, I felt like I resonated with that, because my niece quite literally changed my life. Like her birth really set the entire tone of the next. Now it's been a year and a half. So I feel like I'm growing with her again. Like I've been reborn and I'm like growing with her again. And it's just like the most phenomenal thing. And you're exactly right. Like you understand, Jill, that your place in the family as well and your role and how different it is. I really want to talk about the Parramatta Artist Studio program. You got accepted into the program and then COVID hit. So how did that impact you as an artist?
Again, it was one of those weird timing things. It was like when I applied when I was in Japan, and then I found out when I was on that trip, and it was kind of like, again, oh, that's what I'm going to be doing next year. And then I got back, and that was when those first cases of COVID started happening, and it was like we just started to enter that territory. And I moved into the studios in December 2019, and by end of February we moved out. And we really didn't come back properly till like October. Like we were allowed back from June, but we were, there were 12 of us there, and we were only allowed to have like 2 or 3 people in the whole complex, even though we had individual studios, 2 or 3 at the same time, which just was really difficult deciding, who deserves to be in their studio today, even though it was like our own studio space. Like looking back, I'm like, how are those regulations right? But it's been a learning process and constantly developing over the past few years for everyone. But the studio program itself, like aside from like going through the pandemic, going through not being able to have access to a studio and then coming back and that flip-flopping a lot, that there was still like so many beautiful times being in that studio space. And a lot of it, I think, is just being surrounded by other artists. And for me at SCA, I really didn't have that, especially in my honours year. Like I was in screen arts. There was only two of us. I really was the only person that came into the studio. I had to fight to even have a studio space. And that was also at the time that SCA had survived the shutdown, the closure, and it really was dead. Like when you think about the space itself, like the space at SCA at Cullen Park, even though it's beautiful and like I love being in that space, it's meant to separate people. And that's kind of what it kind of reverted to by the end of it. It was like cold, quiet, alone. It wasn't a very like art making environment for me compared to, for example, the ceramic studios where it was like 12 artists in one large space, all making work, talking to each other. That's what I had at Parramatta Artist Studios. And that's when I kind of found the value of having a studio in those studio programs.
Oh, that's so cool. That kind of camaraderie is like, it's so nice when you do find that. I actually didn't know, Kaylee, how did you go through COVID? We didn't talk about this in our episode.
It sounds weird, but I was supposed to get engaged in Europe, and kind of missed out on that life milestone. But it was beautiful because like my partner did a big like a little Italy, because it was going to be on the Amalfi Coast, in our backyard, and had the red and white tablecloths and like the bulbs of garlic and beautiful candles and amazing stuff. It was actually like more us than it could have been, but right. So it was really beautiful. But lockdown, I feel like lockdown in particular was really difficult because I was very thankful for living in Ashfield. Ashfield is, to me, it was a beautiful community to live in. Like my neighbours were really helpful. We would do plant swaps, and I did a lot of gardening during that time. And my one a day coffee was like, I just walked up. That was my little walk around. But otherwise, I had my housemate and my partner and the dog and the cat. So I went through it pretty easily, but I'm a very, like, I'll sit down at a cafe with someone and talk for hours. So not having the cafe culture was the hardest thing for me, weirdly.
But it's such an interesting question to ask all these artists, musicians that have been on the podcast, and chefs and fashion designers, like, how did they cope through COVID? And it's really interesting how a lot of them said, especially like big businesses, people showed up. All the relationships that you invested in for so long, in terms of like, if you're a chef, you got to depend on your suppliers. And as a florist, like I interviewed Lisa Cooper, Dr. Lisa Cooper. I interviewed her a couple of weeks ago, and she's like, her suppliers, her growers, it's like those relationships showed up for her during that time, which I thought was really interesting. There's something I really wanted to quote again, Jill. You said, I'm approaching life with more open heart, and I look forward to welcoming opportunities in whatever way they may present themselves, even if it's not how I had imagined or planned. I'm trying to think more about how I want art to be in my life rather than what I think other people want from me as an artist. How has that openness evolved?
I guess when I was in art school, and even in the last few years, like I definitely am the type of person where I'm like, I need to plan this to a T if I want this to happen. Like I, need to know where I'm going, and I can't miss an opportunity because that will ruin everything. Like that was kind of my working method, which, was great in terms of like bursting into like taking up opportunities and really like getting going. But it's so unsustainable. And in terms of like I'm like less of an anxious person now, but was a terribly anxious person a few years ago because I put so much pressure on myself to hit so many like unrealistic targets. And, you know, every time I hit a target, the bar moves higher. So that really just, you know, and as an artist as well, it's not like I guess, you know, it's not like your work's ever complete in a sense, or that you kind of hit a target, someone rewards you, and you kind of get to, I don't know, move on to the next level of the job. It's kind of completely a relationship that comes down to you and yourself and you and your audience, and that can be so unexpected and unplanned, and expecting that there's going to be you being able to predict results in that sense, that kind of becomes just very unrealistic. So I've definitely, in a sense, like had to unlearn those expectations of myself and kind of become more like just more engaged with, if things happen, they happen. If they don't, they don't. You know, like I'll never miss an opportunity because there'll be something else like waiting and ready.
Like it's not meant for you, you know, there is something that's available for you. I think that about like life. I think it takes a lot of surrender to just really let go, and probably a shit show as well, which is like would have been COVID for you. I mean, for so many of us, you know, things that are not in your control that you have to just work with. And I really want to know, like, what is the big dream for you as an artist? Like, what is the dream?
This is interesting because I feel like, you know, it changes a lot, or, you know, I've always wanted to be an artist. And, you know, like I think even if I don't know, like 15-year-old Gill saw me now, I'd be like, sick, you did it, you've done it, like cool. And it's funny how, again, that bar keeps getting higher and higher, which is very normal in any job. I think, you know, one thing that I've kind of come more to terms with, especially going through lockdowns, is that I don't have to, like, the practice doesn't have to kind of be a success that is defined by certain moments or certain achievements. Like, this will remain a part of me for the rest of my life. And, you know, the practice is this beautiful thing that can ebb and flow. You know, if there was a point where my other jobs picked up and I'm like, I'm not going to practice for a few months, or like I'm trying to view it more in that respect, so that if there are things that come back, that come into my life unexpectedly, or I don't know, if I want to travel, or if I want to have kids in the future, or any of those things, like the practice remains. And I think that's kind of been something I've kind of had to come to terms with. And in art school, you know, like everyone talks about having these other jobs and, you know, like, I don't know, having other things in your life that's not just art. And back then I was like, no way, art is everything to me. And it still is, but it's just in a different aspect. And maybe I've kind of found some peace in that there's other things in my life that I love. I do other jobs, and I think that makes I've fallen even more in love with art in that sense.
Gill, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
And Hayley, thank you for coming on the show again. You're amazing.
Always a pleasure.
That was a really good one. All right, folks, till next week.